Have you ever wondered why a sudden surprise, even a really good one, like a surprise party, stresses you out far more than a planned life change? Like, even if the end result is exactly the same.
Right, yeah. Or, why dropping your keys on the floor after a long, exhausting Tuesday at work can make you want to just sit down in the hallway and cry.
Oh, totally. But then on a relaxed Saturday morning, you'd pick those exact same keys up and, you wouldn't even think twice about it.
Exactly. It's such a universal experience.
It really is. So today on The Deep Dive, we are exploring this fascinating document by a thinker named Menelaos Georgiadis. It's called My Theory on Stress. And it actually attempts to solve this exact mystery.
Yeah, and the way he does it is, it's pretty wild.
Right. Because he takes human stress, which we usually treat as this messy, unpredictable emotion, and he turns it into a literal physics equation.
It is a really radical reframing of how we experience our own lives because, we have this habit of defining stress purely by the external event itself.
Right, like we point to our environment and say, my job is stressful, or moving to a new city is a stressful thing.
Exactly. We define stress by what is happening to us.
Yeah.
But this source just throws that entirely out the window. Georgiadis argues that stress isn't defined by what is happening at all.
Which is mind-blowing.
Yeah. He says it is defined entirely by how fast it's happening.
Okay, so let's get into the math of this. We're looking at a foundational equation here that borrows directly from the world of physics. It's essentially calculating velocity or power, but for human biology.
Right.
So Georgiadis proposes that stress equals the magnitude of change, which he calls delta C, divided by time, or delta T.
Yeah, so you have a numerator, which is the sheer size of the change you're facing, and a denominator, which is the time you have to process it.
Let's visualize that for a second. Say you decide you're going to completely change career paths.
That's a huge shift.
Massive. So the magnitude of change, your delta C, is enormous. But if you give yourself 5 years to go back to school, transition your finances, adapt to the new industry, your time variable, your delta T, is also massive.
And because you are dividing a large number by another very large number, the resulting stress score actually stays incredibly low.
Right, the math balances out.
Exactly. The biological system has the runway it needs to maintain its baseline stability. It adapts incrementally without sounding any alarms.
But let's take that exact same career pivot and shrink the timeline. You get fired with zero warning and have to start a brand new job in a totally unfamiliar field tomorrow morning.
Oof. Yeah.
The magnitude of change hasn't actually increased. You're still doing the same career pivot, but your delta T, your time, has shrunk down basically to zero.
And basic math dictates that when you divide any number by a fraction that is, rapidly approaching zero, the result just explodes toward infinity.
The calculation goes off the charts.
Yeah, right. That mathematical explosion is what we experience physically and mentally as systemic shock. So it is the speed of the demand that overloads our biology, not the demand itself.
Okay, think about the physical mechanics of braking in a car.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right, because your magnitude of change, your delta C, is taking a vehicle from 60 miles per hour down to zero.
Yep.
If you have a long highway off-ramp and a full 100 meters to come to a halt, your time variable is large. The braking is smooth, your coffee doesn't spill, everything is totally fine.
Smooth sailing.
But if you hit a solid brick wall, your time to reach 0 miles per hour is instantly zero. The change is exactly the same, 60 to 0, but the sheer absence of time turns a routine maneuver into a catastrophic shock.
The car analogy captures the mechanics of the numerator and the denominator beautifully.
Yeah.
But, classical biology does point out a slight gap in applying pure, rigid physics to living, breathing organisms.
Yeah, I was actually wondering about that. Because if we follow the strict math of delta C divided by delta T, an instant transition should theoretically always cause infinite stress.
Right.
But what if the instant change is something that takes absolutely zero effort? Falling asleep is a great example. Boom, instant change of consciousness. Time is basically zero, but falling asleep is the literal opposite of stressful.
Oh, totally. And the author acknowledges this exact physiological reality. A rapid transition, no matter how instantaneous, doesn't damage the system if it requires zero resource consumption to execute.
Oh, okay.
Because biology requires effort. Adapting to change requires fuel. And this realization sets up the missing, really the most crucial piece of our equation.
Which is what?
Well, we have the change, we have the time, but we are missing the system's actual capacity to handle the demand.
So we need a buffer.
Exactly.
This brings us back to dropping those keys. Dropping them on a Tuesday night takes the exact same amount of time and is the exact same amount of physical change as dropping them on a Saturday morning.
The external math hasn't changed at all.
Right. So something inside us has to account for why one scenario causes a breakdown and the other is just a minor annoyance.
And that internal buffer is what the author introduces into the denominator as R, standing for resilience.
R for resilience, okay.
Yeah, and this transforms our formula from a cold physics calculation into a dynamic, living biological model. The fully realized equation is this: stress equals the magnitude of change divided by the product of resilience multiplied by time.
So stress equals delta C divided by R times delta T. We've basically parked resilience right next to time on the bottom of the fraction.
Yep. The bigger your R, the smaller your stress. Resilience acts as the shock absorber on that car you mentioned.
That makes sense.
And the text goes quite deep into what actually comprises this R variable, because it strips away all those self-help cliches about, like, mental toughness and breaks resilience down into 3 tangible biological components: energy, health, and knowledge.
Okay, let's break those down, starting with energy, or E, or are we talking about just feeling awake or something deeper?
We are talking about literal physiological fuel. This is the blood glucose available to your brain. It is the cellular energy fueling your muscles.
Wow.
Yeah, so if you haven't eaten or you're exhausted from a 10-hour shift, your E variable is objectively depleted.
Okay, so what's the second component?
The second component is health, or H. This is your structural integrity.
Like the actual hardware of the body.
Hardware.
Yeah.
Exactly. How robust is your immune system today? Do you have an underlying infection? Is there chronic inflammation? Baseline physical health determines how much load the structure can bear before bending.
And the third component, which I think is arguably the most interesting, is knowledge or experience, which we'll call K.
Yeah.
Knowledge is a part of biological resilience. That makes a lot of sense when you think about muscle memory or learning a new skill.
It really does.
Let's say I'm trying to lift a 50-pound dumbbell. The 50 pounds is a fixed magnitude of change. It's always 50 pounds.
But the first time you try to lift it, your knowledge of the movement is low. Your nervous system is inefficiently firing muscles. You're wasting energy. Your structural health isn't adapted to the load.
So my R is low, which means the stress on my body is massive.
Exactly. But if you train for 6 months, you're increasing your health by building muscle density, and you're increasing your knowledge because your nervous system learns the exact neural pathway to move that weight efficiently.
My K and H go up, my denominator gets much larger, so the next time I face that exact same 50-pound challenge, my body absorbs the rapid change with a fraction of the stress output.
Right. The external world didn't get 1 ounce lighter. Your internal denominator just got significantly heavier.
The experience acts as a multiplier.
It does. Knowledge physically reduces the biological energy required to process a change. Think about a novice driver driving in heavy rain versus someone who has driven a taxi in the city for 20 years.
Oh, that's a good one.
The external change is identical, but the novice is gripping the wheel, heart racing, consuming massive amounts of energy. The veteran driver has so much knowledge baked into their nervous system that the action requires almost 0 effort.
Their large R absorbs the change effortlessly. This completely demystifies the whole straw that broke the camel's back phenomenon.
Yes.
We go back to dropping the keys. The change is minuscule. But at 7 p.m., you've been making decisions all day, so your energy fuel tank is empty. You have a slight headache and maybe a cold coming on, so your structural health is compromised.
Yeah, your R value on the bottom of that equation has shrunk to a fraction of its normal size.
So mathematically, dividing even a tiny change by a microscopic R produces a massive, overwhelming stress output.
Exactly. You're not crying over dropped keys.
You're crying over a collapsed denominator.
It is entirely about the denominator. And applying this to real-world extremes is where the source really proves the strength of the model.
Let's do that. Consider a common scenario like a university student facing a massive final exam.
Right, so that's a hefty magnitude of change. Let's say they have to master a 500-page textbook.
Student A is highly organized. They decide to process that change over 20 days. Student B procrastinates and decides to cram the entire 500 pages into just 2 days.
Typical student behavior.
Oh, we've all been there. But mathematically, student B's time variable, their delta T, is essentially 1/10 of student A's. So just on the time variable alone, before we even look at anything else, student B is mathematically forcing their nervous system to endure 10 times the stress for the exact same academic outcome.
But the math gets much more punishing than that. Because student B is cramming, they are staying up all night and likely surviving on energy drinks and junk food.
Their resilience buffer is getting completely shredded. Their energy is fake, and their health is taking a huge hit from sleep deprivation.
Exactly. So if student A is well-rested and operating with an R value of, say, 10, their stress is manageable. But if student B's lack of sleep drops their R down to a 2, the system multiplies the damage. They aren't just dealing with the tenfold increase from the lack of time. The shrunken denominator multiplies the stress by 5 again. Mathematically, student B's biological system is undergoing 50 times the pressure of student A.
50 times the biological pressure. It's a perfect storm. You have 0 time and 0 resilience. So cramming isn't just a bad habit. It is willfully ignoring your R value until the math punishes you.
Punishes you severely.
But you know what happens when your R value is stripped away completely involuntarily? The source explores this by taking this exact same equation into the intensive care unit of a hospital.
Yeah, the ICU is where this framework shifts from being a clever way to look at studying or dropping your keys to describing raw biological survival.
How so?
Well, in an ICU, a critically ill patient's R is at absolute rock bottom. Their energy is entirely consumed just fighting off infection, and their structural health is severely compromised by trauma or disease.
So their denominator is hovering dangerously close to 0.
Yes. And because of that fragile denominator, even an incredibly tiny delta C becomes a life-threatening event. A 1-degree shift in room temperature, a minor change in the angle of the bed, a tiny fluctuation in hydration, any of these demand adaptation.
But the system is so compromised that it cannot absorb even a fractional change.
Right.
Wait, so if a patient's R is basically 0, and they can't handle any change without the stress equation exploding, are the medical machines essentially stepping in as an artificial denominator?
That is exactly what they are doing.
Yeah.
They are functioning precisely as an external R and an external delta T.
That's incredible.
Think about it. A ventilator steps in and physically does the work of expanding the lungs, providing the biological effort so the patient doesn't have to expend any of their own depleted energy.
Wow.
Dialysis machines take over the effort of filtering the blood. Intravenous drips introduce fluids at an incredibly controlled, agonizingly slow rate, which artificially stretches out the time variable.
So the doctors are literally hacking the math. They are slowing down the change and supplementing the resilience to keep the fraction from dividing by 0.
Because dividing by 0 would cause complete systemic failure. They are buying time for the body's natural R to slowly regenerate to a point where it can handle the math of basic survival again.
But, okay, if we step out of the ICU, back into daily life, we can't hook ourselves up to a ventilator to buy us time when our boss drops a massive project on our desk.
Unfortunately not.
Right. What happens when this high-stress math just keeps running and the pressure accumulates? We don't always have the luxury of stretching out the timeline.
That brings us to the danger of chronic stress, which biology refers to as allostatic load.
Allostatic load. How does that fit into our equation of change, time, and resilience?
If you imagine this equation plotting a graph over the course of your life, allostatic load is the total accumulated area under the curve.
Yeah.
It's the sum total of all the times your stress calculations spiked because you were forced to process rapid change without adequate time or resilience. And the danger here lies in a biological feedback loop.
Because processing all that change isn't free. Adapting costs biological currency.
It costs immense amounts of currency. Enduring a high-stress event consumes massive amounts of energy and creates wear and tear that damages your health.
And energy and health are the foundational blocks of resilience.
Exactly. So high stress shrinks your R.
Yeah.
But look at the equation. If your R is now smaller, the next change you encounter, even a minor one, is going to produce a higher stress output than it normally would.
Oh, man.
Which then burns through even more energy, which damages your health further, shrinking your R again.
It's a compounding spiral.
Yes.
It accelerates until you hit what the source describes as the yield point, biological burnout. It actually reminds me of the concept of metal fatigue in engineering.
Oh, how so?
Well, if you take a metal paperclip and bend it back and forth, you are applying a stress load. The paperclip doesn't snap on the first bend or the second or the third.
Right.
But every time you force that rapid change, you are accumulating microscopic fractures inside the metal. You are fundamentally lowering its structural health, its R.
Yes. Exactly.
And eventually, with the exact same amount of force you used on the first bend, the metal just snaps.
That is a flawless physical representation of how allostatic load degrades the human nervous system over time.
But wait, a paperclip is inanimate. It doesn't know it's accumulating microfractures. It doesn't know it's about to snap.
Right.
Humans generally do. We have a warning system. People say, I'm at my breaking point, or I feel like I'm reaching my limit. How does our body actually know we are approaching that yield point before the snap happens?
It comes down to a fascinating neurobiological mechanism called interoception.
Interoception?
Yeah. Interoception is your brain's ability to continuously sense and map the internal state of your body. Under Georgiadis's framework, your brain is actively running this exact calculus in the background, serving as a predictive error system.
Wait, my brain is running the delta C over delta T equation right now.
Constantly.
Yeah.
It is gathering real-time data, your heart rate variability, your cortisol levels, your breathing rate, your muscle tension.
Just constantly checking the gauges.
Yep. It uses all of that data to constantly estimate your available R. It then compares that R against the rate of change you are currently experiencing.
So it's looking ahead.
It's projecting the curve. If the brain's subconscious math determines that your resilience is going to hit 0 before the required change is fully processed, it triggers a massive system-wide alarm.
What does that alarm feel like to us?
Profound anxiety, panic attacks, or overwhelming physical fatigue.
Really?
Yeah. It is the biological equivalent of a dashboard warning light screaming, current trajectory will result in structural failure. Abort mission immediately.
Wow. That completely changes how we should view anxiety. It's not a character flaw or a weakness. It is literally a mathematical warning system.
Exactly.
It's your interoceptive network telling you that your denominator is shrinking faster than you can afford. So if our subconscious is already running this math, how do we bring this to the conscious level? Like, how do we actively use this equation to manipulate our stress in daily life?
Well, the author playfully introduces a new unit of measurement for this biological stress, naming it the Georgiades, or GIBAD.
The Georgiades. I love that. Okay, so if my goal is to lower my daily Georgiades score, the math dictates I only have a couple of levers I can pull.
Right.
If the problem is a massive fraction, I either have to make the top number smaller or the bottom numbers bigger.
That is the elegant simplicity of his practical applications. You have exactly 3 levers.
Okay, lever 1 has to be decreasing the numerator, the magnitude of change. In real life, that's chunking, right?
Precisely.
Like, if the change is writing a 300-page book, the delta C is terrifying. But if you decide the only change you're making today is writing one single page, you've artificially shrank the numerator. The stress score immediately drops.
You compartmentalize the demand so the math becomes manageable.
Okay, lever 2 is increasing the time variable, the delta T, stretching the runway.
The source refers to this as strategic delay, or quite simply, patience. If you force a longer timeline to adapt, the denominator grows and the stress shrinks.
I am absolutely adopting the term strategic delay. It sounds infinitely more professional than procrastination.
Doesn't it? But there is a real difference, isn't there?
Yeah.
Procrastination is student B shrinking the time variable by avoiding the work.
Right.
Strategic delay is intentionally giving yourself 3 days to draft a complex email instead of firing it off in 5 minutes. You are mathematically optimizing your Georgiades score by refusing to rush.
You are consciously leveraging time as a tool for adaptation. I like that. And the third lever, of course, is increasing your resilience, your R.
Yes. You have to prioritize the activities that replenish energy, health, and knowledge. Rest, highly nutritious food, physical movement, and active learning.
Which brings up an interesting question about taking a break. Lever 1 and 2 are about managing the task itself. But what about just going on vacation? How does the math explain lying on a beach?
Oh, this is a beautiful mathematical quirk in the theory.
Really?
Yeah. The equation measures the magnitude of change. But what happens when the change, the delta C, is a wildly positive one, like leaving a toxic office environment and arriving at a quiet mountain cabin?
It's still a massive change of state.
It is, but because the change removes demand rather than adding it, it mathematically creates negative stress. And in biological terms, the definition of negative stress is recovery.
Recovery is literally negative stress. The math works backward to heal the system.
Yes. It is the state where time is finally working for you instead of against you, allowing your R to slowly regenerate. But, looking at recovery through this lens highlights a severe pathology in how modern society operates.
Because modern society is actively hostile to giving us time.
So hostile Modern culture is obsessed with keeping delta T as close to zero as technologically possible.
Oh, absolutely. We have instant messaging, same-day delivery, 247 news cycles constantly demanding our attention, immediate email responses.
We are culturally expected to undergo instant transitions all day long.
And by systematically destroying our delta T, society is robbing us of the time we desperately need to recover our R.
Exactly.
We're walking around with these massive numerators of constant change and tiny depleted denominators, and we wonder why an entire generation feels like they are permanently hovering right at the yield point. We are mathematically starving ourselves of recovery.
The stress of modern life isn't just the volume of things we are asked to do, it's the unrelenting cultural demand that we do them instantly.
So, bringing this all together, when we strip away the physics terminology and the fractional math, the core realization of this deep dive is a total paradigm shift. Stress is not the event. The flat tire, the difficult conversation, the move, those are just external circumstances. As Georgiadis beautifully frames it, stress is the violence that time exerts on our ability to adapt.
It is a profound shift in perspective. It takes stress out of the realm of the uncontrollable external world and places it squarely into variables that you can actually influence.
Exactly. When you start seeing your life through this equation, you aren't just a passive victim of a chaotic week. You become an engineer of your own biology.
I love that phrasing.
Thanks. But it's true. When you feel that interoceptive alarm bell ringing, you can look at the math and make a choice. Can I shrink this change into smaller pieces? Can I introduce a strategic delay to buy myself a wider timeline? Or do I just need to step away and rebuild my denominator with a good night's sleep?
It transforms anxiety from a vague, overwhelming cloud into a mechanical problem with concrete solutions.
It really does. And I want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over. We've talked about how our brains run this calculus subconsciously in the background. But if human stress is genuinely just a mathematical ratio of change, time, and biological resilience, how far are we from wearable tech that brings that math to the surface?
Oh, given the current trajectory of continuous biometric tracking, we are likely very close.
Think about it. Imagine a smartwatch a few years from now. It doesn't just track your heart rate or your step count. It continuously pulls data on your sleep cycles, your blood glucose, your calendar events, and runs this exact Georgiadis calculus in real time.
That would be wild.
Imagine you are about to walk into a major presentation, and instead of a generic take a deep breath notification, your watch buzzes and says, "Warning. Based on poor sleep data and low glucose, your biological denominator is currently too low to process this upcoming change. Initiate a 20-minute strategic delay immediately to avoid structural system failure."
I think a vast majority of the modern workforce would pay an exorbitant amount of money for an accurate denominator warning system.
Oh, I would be first in line. It's wild to think about tracking our stress like a battery percentage. But until we get that piece of technology on our wrists, the next time you drop your keys after a brutal day and feel like the sky is falling, just take a breath and remember the keys aren't actually heavy.
Your denominator is just a little too small today.
Exactly. Initiate a strategic delay, get some rest to build back your resilience, and we'll see you on the next Deep Dive.